Adding to human knowledge is something that benefits everyone. And it's also thrilling because you never know what you're going to find. And so I realized at a very young age that I would be part of the only generation that would ever explore the solar system for the first time.
If one were to make the case that the space age started in 1957 with the launch of Sputnik, then it would follow that someone born in 1942 has arguably spent their entire adult life living in the space age. But if that someone is Gentry Lee, then not only have they been living their entire adult life with space travel as a reality, but they've actually been present in the room for some of the major milestones in the history of humanity's efforts to escape the bounds of Earth. As a scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, Gentry was the director of science analysis and mission planning for the Viking mission to Mars and the Galileo probe to Jupiter, missions that fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the solar system. But he also found time to collaborate with Carl Sagan on the landmark PBS series Cosmos, and then went on to narrate the Discovery Channel program Are We Alone?, which examined the possibility of extraterrestrial life. And if that isn't enough, he co-authored 4 books with legendary science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke. A Zelig-like character, Gentry Lee has been everywhere and worked with everyone at the intersection of interplanetary science and science fiction, and is now the subject of Robert Stone's new wonderful documentary, Starman. The film is both entertaining and educational, which makes great sense given that Gentry is our guide leading us through a lifetime of curiosity and discovery, and we hope that our discussion with him is just as fun and enlightening. A conversation with Gentry Lee, the subject of Robert Stone's documentary, Starman, on Inside the Arthouse, starting now.
Hi, my name is Greg Lemley.
And I'm Raphael Spark.
And welcome to today's episode of Inside the Arthouse. Today we're joined by legendary scientist Gentry Lee, who is the subject of a new documentary directed by Robert Stone. It's called Starman. Thank you for being with us, Gentry.
Delighted to be here.
Just drove across town, right, from Pasadena?
Yes.
That's fantastic. We often get to speak to filmmakers, that is the directors, and not always the subjects, but particularly you.
No offense to Robert, but
yeah, thrilled
when we knew we had the opportunity to sit in with you and talk about the film and your career, we couldn't pass up on it.
Yeah, it's just thrilled to have you here. You have worked for NASA your whole life, and you have been sort of in the room where it happened over and over again. You were there at the first moon launch and landing and Mars, and you've been a part of all of that. I guess, what, is the intent, has one of the intents been about sort of trying to figure out if we are alone?
Well, first let me clarify. I don't work for NASA. I do work for NASA. There's a difference. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory where I work, which is managed by Caltech, is called, and pardon the acronym, an FFRDC, a federally funded research and development company.
Okay, very good.
So I have been working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory for 50 years with some time off for the other things that I did along the way.
Yes.
And the goal of the work has always been, for me and for the people that I work with, to add to human knowledge. And I remember when I was a young man, I said, what can I do in my life that is meaningful? And I said, there's one thing that's clear. Adding to human knowledge is something that benefits everyone. And it's also thrilling because you never know what you're going to find. And so I realized, as I say in the film, at a very young age, that I would be part of the only generation that would ever explore the solar system for the first time. Imagine that. I mean, think 500 years from now. We will now know what the solar system is, just as after the sailors, the Gama
the age of discovery,
did that. Then there was nothing new for a long period of time. And everybody says, oh, but there's going to be more new things. I said, you don't understand. After you explore the solar system, the next place is the nearest star. And the nearest star in today's technology would take us 10,000 years to get there. So therefore, in terms of our exploration, there will be a time period, and I got to participate in the whole thing, from the first landing on Mars all the way through the missions that we're sending now all over the place. It has been a miracle. I remember when I was young, my father said, "You should go to work for IBM or somebody like that." I said, "Dad, I don't want to do that. I want to do something that's exciting." Because he told me, he said, "If you like your job 10% of the time, you're lucky." I said, "Then I'm not going to work. If I only like my job 10% of the time, I'm not going to do it." And a miracle happened. You know, the kind of work that I did and have done could not have been done at any other time in history.
Yeah.
It's just fabulous.
Yeah, no, it's space exploration, absolutely, and just to think of it. Obviously, it's the stuff of science fiction. Just 50 years before you started doing it, right?
It is. Yeah. And what's very interesting is that a lot of the things that were written about in science fiction at the end of the 20th century have now already happened. So if you read a science fiction of like the Brilliant Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke, a lot of it is OBE, overtaken by events. In other words, the things that are there are the infrastructure is no longer applicable because things have changed. Mm-hmm. For example, we have at JPL, we already have a complete center that is tracking all the Earth-crossing asteroids, looking for one that might hit the planet Earth. Well, that was unheard of a long time ago.
Right.
So how did this film happen? I mean, did Robert Stone approach?
Wonderful question.
Okay, I mean, I know it's a sort of a simple question, but I'm interested because
it is wonderful.
You're a movie waiting to happen, clearly.
Because, all right, I get a call from the head of the board of trustees of Caltech that manages APL.
Right.
Who is a longtime friend of mine who started his own space company, did very well, and then sold it, made millions of dollars and all that. But I met him first. He was an intern for me on Viking in the 70s.
Wow.
Okay. And so we stayed in touch the whole time. He said, "Gentry, I have a friend who's a filmmaker, and he's thinking about making a movie about robotics. He did Chasing the Moon about the Apollo thing.
Yes, which I saw.
And he's now thinking about doing the other side." I said, "Will you have dinner with him?" So I said, "Sure, I'd be glad to have dinner with him. You know, I like people who do that sort of thing." So I went to a dinner, and this fellow, Dave Thompson, was there, and Robert Stone was there, and one of Robert Stone's investors was there, and Robert Stone's wife was there, and we just started chatting. And as we chatted, we talked about space, and we talked about then Cosmos, and we talked about Arthur C. Clarke, and the guy said, "This has been a very interesting evening." I said, "Fine, great, thank you for the dinner. It was a fun conversation," and off we went. About 3 or 4 weeks later, he said, "I'm seriously thinking about making the movie about you." "About me?" I said, "Wow." And I said, "Okay." He said, "But I'm not completely sure. Would you be willing to do some shooting in a Hollywood studio just to see how that might work out?" I said, "Well, okay, if I can find the time to do it." It was hysterically fun. Now, you know, I'm a scientist and an engineer,
and you're working every day. I mean, you're you're 84 now.
I'm almost 84.
Almost 84, okay. And you're working every day. So you've got to sort of schedule time off work to go to
so
do
I had
this
to schedule all
Hollywood
time.
studio.
So I show up at this Hollywood studio, and there's 8 people there. I said, "What are all these people doing?" I said, "Well, we're all here for you." I said, "What? It takes 8 people to do whatever this is?" And this little girl walked in and says, "I'm your makeup girl." I said, "You're my what?" so anyway, so we filmed for 21 hours. Okay.
21 hours straight?
No.
Okay, they were. Otherwise, got to call the union and
Robert.
There is no union for documentary subjects.
Well, I'm not going to start one now.
Right. Robert had some fantastic questions. He was really on top of it. But I said, "Look, let me suggest, rather than you interrogating me, you tell me the topic, and let me go, because I am all supercharged, ready to go, and ready to talk about it." So we did that. And he said, when it was over, he said, "I think this is fantastic." And then later he confirmed with me, "That's what we're going to do. We're going to make the movie about you." And then they spent he and his team did a remarkable job. You've seen the film, you know.
Yes, sure.
They got stuff from my childhood. They got stuff from my high school days.
The archival material in the film is amazing.
The archival material is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And they strung it together with themes that resonate with the words that I was saying. And I told him, I said, you know, I can't imagine how anybody could have got the essence of Gentry Lee better than you did.
They really did capture it. They really did capture it. And you
And the film is so much more richer than just you and the space exploration, because there is your philosophy of life, joie de vivre,
and the people you encountered, the people that you were in the room with.
Enthusiasm for learning and new knowledge.
The stuff about Arthur C. Clarke. I mean, look, what? You want to have a great lifetime? Spend 5 years as Carl Sagan's partner and 5 years as Arthur C. Clarke's partner. Can you imagine for a knowledge junkie like me what kind of life that was?
But it's not just knowledge. I mean, I think let's talk a little bit about Cosmos, which is a landmark, program, and it's covered in the film. But how did that come about, and the legacy of that program?
Well, in the film, Carl worked for me on Viking. It was very difficult I was very young.
I'm trying to remember, Viking is the deep space exploration.
Viking was the first landing on the planet Mars, the first landing on any other planet of any kind.
Right.
Okay. And I was fortunate enough to be working in an environment where nobody had ever done those things before. And so as people didn't do their job, I would be asked, can you do that too? Can you do that too? Can you do that too? So by the time we were flying the mission, I was managing 300 scientists and engineers. I was 34 years old.
Wow.
Okay. And Carl was one of those people. And so Carl had a tendency in operational meetings where we needed to make decisions to filibuster, as he would. And I would take him aside. I said, Carl, look, I'm going to make a deal with you. we in these operational meetings, I have to make a decision about what we're going to do on Mars the next day. That's not the time to be eloquent. Okay? If you are
very eloquent.
He is innately elegant.
Your ideas are
To a fault.
fantastic.
Yes,
Okay.
right. Yeah.
But here's what I'm going to do. I'm giving you 2 mornings a week, 1 hour. You come into my office and you tell me everything that I ought to be doing that I'm not doing. And that's perfectly fine. But you can't do that when we have a 45-minute meeting that an answer has to come out the other. He said, fine. So we became friends. Okay, so as we went through it, as you saw in the film, we were not overwhelmed by the journalists who were covering Viking.
They had no idea how to sort of get their head around it. They didn't understand the minutia. They didn't understand what you were dealing with.
Well, there were 2 problems, Raphael. First of all, scientists and engineers don't communicate well to begin with. And when they're uncomfortable, they hide behind the language that only their colleagues understand.
Right.
All right? The second thing is, in those days, in the 1970s, there were no journalists who knew squat about science and technology.
Right.
Okay, so I finally, after I was doing most of the press conferences in those days, and finally what I would do is I would take Jules Bergman aside and say, here's the question you ought to ask. just to make sure that it was done. So anyway, when it was over, Carl and I were both said, why does the world not understand? We just put a human handprint on another planet. For goodness sakes, this is a gigantic step for mankind. Yes, sending human beings to the moon was fine, but that was, pardon me, comparatively easy compared to sending a robotic spacecraft millions and hundreds of millions of miles away and landing on Mars. And he said, well, I'm disappointed too. What should we do about it? And I said, let's make a television series. He looked at me, he said, what in the world are you talking about? He said, we don't know anything about making a television series. And I looked him straight in the eye and I said, Carl, 10 years ago, I didn't know a damn thing about landing on Mars. So we went off and
Love that.
We went first to KCET and they said, we have to raise $6 million to do this show. And actually, the first outline of Cosmos was done next to my swimming pool on December the 26th, 1976. Okay. And we outlined 13 episodes on a gigantic legal pad. Now, they changed,
Right.
but it was that was the genesis.
Yeah.
And there were some wonderful. We had not raised enough money, and so the people at KCT, we need another $1.5 million. I said, okay. At that time, the Japanese economy was very, very strong.
Yep.
So I said, here's my plan. Tell me the leading television station in Japan. I'm going to learn enough Japanese. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to sell them on doing Cosmos. And they did. That's what I did.
How do you just like you give a month of jamming Japanese so that you can pitch your show? That's
I'm a knowledge junkie, Mafia, and I love languages.
Wild.
Okay, yeah. And so listen. But I sometimes put my foot in my mouth and chew on it. They had me give a big speech in 1989 in the Asahi Shimbun in Japan.
Yeah.
And I did the first 4.5 minutes in Japanese.
You must have blown their mind.
They went wild. But then they started asking me questions at a very, very high rate, and I couldn't keep up. And so finally I said, "Sumimasen." I'm sorry. Can you ask the questions in English, please?
That's funny. But clearly you wowed them, and they said yes.
Yes. In fact, the scenes that we shot in Japan, you may remember the scene about the carapace. Maybe you do. It's been a long time.
No.
The crab that has the samurai warrior.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we shot all that in Japan with the Heiki Genji, a little history and all that sort of stuff. I have to say that working with Carl was such his mind was so broad and so interested in so many things that it was always a delight. So,
I mean, the moments that you have with him in the film are breathtaking, and it reminded me that Cosmos was such a huge, it was such a event television. It was really something that we couldn't wait to watch.
It was shown in 30 countries. Yeah. I mean, it was, and today there is nothing of that ilk. It was revolutionary because we said, we're not just going to talk about the exploration of space. We're going to talk about the history of science. We're going to talk about scientific method, how you find truth, how it's gone through the ages. And we got Adrian Malone, who had done, there's a story behind that, which I'll just briefly tell you. When we were trying to raise money, the KCET people said, I'm sorry, Gentry, but you and Carl are not known television producers, and we're having a hard time selling you. So I said, okay, what do we need? They said, we need somebody that has bona fides as a television. So I then sat home and I watched 50, 60 hours of television trying to figure out who would be the right person. And finally I decided Adrian Malone. He had been the director of The Ascent of Man, Jacob Bronowski. Now, this may all be old stuff or everything. So I called London, and I said, I would like to speak to Adrian Malone. They said, who the hell are you? And I said, well, let me just say that I have an idea that he would be interested in. And so I told him that we had this idea for Cosmos, and if he would fly to New York, Carl and I would meet him there, and we would explain what we wanted to do. So he flew, and we went to New York, and we met Adrian Malone. So I told Carl on site, Carl was the intellectual head, but I was sort of the person putting all the pieces together. I said, now, Carl, it may get to money and things, and if so, just let me have it.
Just back off for a second, right?
Okay.
Give me some space, right?
We're having this conversation with Adrian Malone, and he says, well, this sounds very interesting. Can you give me any indication of what you can offer me? And I was prepared, so I whipped out a bunch of stuff, and then after he said, oh, that sounds very good. And when he left, Carl said, how are we going to get the money to pay him that? I said, don't worry. I'll get it. I don't have it now, but I'll get it before we sign the contract. And so Adrian came in, and he was excellent. Now, during the filming of Cosmos, there were times you can't have two chiefs. Okay, Adrian was a chief, Carl was a chief.
Right.
And there were times when they didn't necessarily agree. Okay? So I said, my job is to make this thing happen.
Yeah.
Okay? I know I couldn't possibly do it without the two of you.
Right.
But what an amazing, that you can still watch Cosmos. It's been almost 50 years. You can still watch it and say, oh my gosh, there's so much there.
Yeah.
There's so much. I'm sure there's so many people who've said, I became a scientist because of that show.
Oh, yes. Not just because of that show, but also because of the Viking landing on Mars. Because we had all the publicity that doesn't happen today. I mean, our press conferences on Viking, which you saw some of in the film, were attended by every network, hundreds of people. What was bad about it, was they didn't capture the emotional lift. I mean, you're sitting there and you're saying, I am sending commands every day 100 million miles to a robot, the first robot that ever landed on another planet. And it's sending us back pictures on the scale of our own backyard from another planet. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
But they couldn't get, they didn't understand what was so amazing about it. They just want to know. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. So when Robert there was so much material that could have been put in the film. I mean, there's
yes.
I mean,
in Starman, yes.
In the film Starman, and so he decided, let's do the things that were the biggest change in our perception of what. I mean, the rovers that are roving around on Mars right now are fantastic. Technologically, they are far more advanced than the stuff we were doing 50 years ago.
Of course.
Okay, but the first time something happens is very special. Before we landed on Mars, nobody really had any idea what it would look like. 1/3 of the first photograph was of the foot pads, which we show, and everybody said, what a dumb first picture. And I said, listen, you don't understand. 1/3 of my scientists thought that Mars was going to be the consistency of Rapid Shave, and that we were going to sink like that. So we took a picture of the foot pad first to show that we weren't sinking.
That's great. That's great.
Do you find now that there is more knowledgeable news coverage, people, that there are people who are dedicated to covering science and technology, and also just the general, I mean, look, before Cosmos, Mutual of Omaha was pretty much all you got for, the natural world on television. And now we've got, amazing programs that...
There are journalists today who have degrees in science. And I can talk to them about very sophisticated concepts. I'll give you a perfect example. Right now on Mars, that we have found some very interesting. We have a mission that's sampling the rocks for the samples to eventually be brought back to it, and we have found some chemical markers that if we saw them in a rock on the planet Earth, we would say they were made by microbes. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Now, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I am not announcing that we have found microbes on Mars, just that the remote sensing instruments that are looking at those things are seeing exactly the same thing they would see with a rock that had been eroded by microbes. Okay? Now, I can now talk to a journalist about biochemistry, geochemistry, and things like that, and they can follow me. In 1976, as we show in the film, one of our brilliant scientists is talking about what he found in his inorganic chemical experiment, and then a reporter says, can you explain to me what that has to do with life? And he has to say, what I just talked about has nothing to do with life. But it's clear that he's, not
fed up, right?
Right.
Yeah. And they're looking for the headlines, right? They're just looking to run for some splashy something or other. I mean, that's...
Yeah, but that was because they don't... in those days, they underestimated the ability of an intelligent person to follow a logical argument in which you don't dive deep into the science, you summarize it in a way that somebody else can understand. And that's actually in the film Starman.
Yes.
All I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take very complex ideas and make them palatable and understandable by an intelligent person.
I mean, Robert Stone has done an amazing thing because you get to do two things with the film. One is obviously we get this sort of the history of this program, over 50 years that you're still in, that you're still actively a part of. And we also get sort of a deep dive into what your experience is. And as you said, as we were starting, kind of I want to say sort of a charmed life. I mean, you've literally been in every single room where it happened with the space program, it would seem, over the past, half century.
The robotic program. Now, everybody says, why did you choose the robotic program instead of the human program? And I said, it's very clear. Okay. The goal is the acquisition of new knowledge. There is no comparison. Okay. What the robots can do is so much more cost and time efficient than what human beings can do.
Right.
This bothered my mother. Okay, before she died.
I just want to meet Neil Armstrong.
She said to me, I have no idea what it is you're doing, but I saw that guy walk. And she says, why do you think it's so much more important to do robotic stuff? I said, Mom, don't you realize that the robots that we send out, we can design them to do whatever it is we want them to do. Now, you can ask a human to do what you want to do, but he or she may or may not do it. But I said the biggest thing is that in general, the cost of doing a given mission, whatever it is, with a human versus with a robot is about 50 to 70 times greater if you're sending a human. She said, why? You have to bring the human back.
You kind of want him to live.
You can't leave it there, right? And you got to feed it, and you got to keep it warm. And
so, and when I in the film, I'm asked, would you like to go to space yourself? I said, what do you mean? I've been there. I designed the software.
Right.
Yeah.
My mind went to the planet.
Has traveled there.
The best part of me.
Yeah.
The part that doesn't need bathrooms. And
That's not a bad part of you. I mean,
no, I'm just trying to make a point.
All right.
Now, I have to, if anyone's listening to this, or if you're watching this, you can sort of see that I have two guests who planned their attire independently, as it were. We've got a Dodgers shirt over here and a Dodgers hat over there. I guess.
The film sort of starts with baseball. I mean, arguably, it's in terms of the awareness of your interest and your affinity for science and mathematics came from baseball.
Started with baseball, and I was a strange little boy. Okay, don't pull any punches about it. My mother and father would look at me, okay, that sort of thing. And so when I was 4, actually, I started following baseball. And then I would hear the radio announcer, this was, TV was coming, but we didn't have a TV, talk about batting averages. And I said to my father, how do I find out about batting averages? He said, go ask Jeremy down in the corner. I think he knows. So I went to Jeremy. I said, Jeremy, they keep talking about Pee Wee Reese's batting average. And what does that mean? They said, well, it's a measure of how many hits he gets. So basically, by the time I was 5, I was doing the Dodger batting averages every day. I was a Dodger fan. I mean, I went to Ebbets Field, so Jackie Robinson.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And so I would spend every day recomputing all the Dodger batting averages. And that was when I discovered, hey, you know what? Mathematics can help you out in your daily life. And so that was the beginning. And I was reasonably good at mathematics.
And you, in the film, you said that someone had sort of asked you what you were doing, and then they said, oh, 5-year-olds don't do that, and we need to test you. And so they came to your parents and said, look, can we take your little boy, essentially, and test him, because this is unusual?
Yes, and they did. And what's not in the film, but I will share with you, is they decided when I was 5 years old that I should be put in the 5th grade.
Oh.
And I said, imagine this. I'm 5 years old. I may have been 6. No, I was 5. I go to PS 154 in Queens, and I'm in this room with 10 and 11-year-olds.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to tie my shoes.
Oh, God. Yeah.
You know, and it was such a complete terrible thing that I only stayed for 1 week.
Oh, I get that. I get that.
But you talk about finding a teacher that did get you and then is able to direct that knowledge.
Greg, before the teacher who got me.
Well, yeah, I'm sure there were a few that did.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. When I was in the 6th grade, my teacher told me that she was going to do everything possible to get me out of her class. I said, but I'm required by law to go to school.
Reminding her of this.
So she went to the principal and she said, I cannot deal with that boy. He just talks whenever he feels like talking, and he already knows everything I'm going to say, so he just disrupts the class. What can we do with him? So the principal happened to know the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the state of Texas.
Whoa.
And said, so he called him and he says, how old do your pages have to be? You know, the people who run around and do stuff for the legislators? He said, well, they're supposed to be 14. He says, I've got an 11-year-old who...
Smarter than...
So instead of going to school for the next 2.5 months, I went and worked as a page in the legislature for the state of Texas. And I still remember things. The Reuben Centerfit was the guy who was the Speaker of the House, and they had a song about this guy who was very difficult. Reuben, Reuben, I've been thinking what a better place this would be if you'd take old blank blank out and throw him. He was another legislator in the deep blue sea. I remember that from being a page.
So you finally were. At what point were you able to find someone, and what did they? Your one teacher got you, but then where did they put you so that you could actually?
Bertha Casey. There's an elementary school named after her in Austin, and I have told the film people and everything. I said it would be a really great thing when we're in Austin if I could go to that school, and I could somehow dedicate something. She changed my life. Now, I'm going to give you far more detail than is in the movie, okay?
That's why we do this.
Right. She knew I was a problem. And when I walked into her class, which was Latin, I did both Latin and English with her, but it was Latin. Before I even sat down, she said, Gentry, I've heard about you. She says, I want you to flourish in my class, but not at the expense of the other kids. Okay? So if I make special assignments for you, will you do your very best to let the class not be disrupted? I said, okay. So we started Latin. I loved it, and I was doing very well. And listen to this. 6 weeks into my first Latin class, she brings me the Aeneid by Virgil. She says, this is your personal assignment.
Right.
Translate 1 canto a week for me. And I looked at her, and she said, oh, and here is a Latin-English dictionary because you're going to need it. Armas virumque cano, that's the way it starts. And and then she had me read De Bello Gallico in Latin by Julius Caesar. I was 12, 13 years old. And whenever anything happened and I got in some other trouble in the school, and she would come and she would tell the teacher that was having a problem with me, you don't understand. Just give him something that he needs to reach for.
To do, right.
And so...
And that was the key that unlocked.
And then for the rest of... Until she was 88, I guess, and died, we kept in contact. And one of my favorite stories is when after my first novel was written, Cradle, with Arthur, I was in Austin.
This is a science fiction that you've written.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. That was the first one. And I went to see her, and she lived with her. She was a spinster, and she had a spinster younger sister 2 or 3 years later. The house was spinsterish, is the best way to describe it. So I go in, and she says, I read your novel. She says, it's a very interesting novel. But Gentry, you used too many curse words. And I taught you that people who use curse words are using them only because they don't know enough English vocabulary to say the same thing in a proper way.
She corrected you. That's fantastic.
It was wonderful.
Oh, God.
I still get tears in my eyes when I think of all the different times that I saw her. When I was, I won the Texas State Championship in number sense when I was in high school. Okay, number sense is mental arithmetic. You get 80 problems, and you write the answers as fast as you can. Okay, and I won the state championship.
Of course you did.
And so, and so when I went to the school to try to get my name put on the plaque, which was awarded to the school, Miss Casey went to the principal, who didn't like me because I'd caused some trouble.
Right.
Without going,
Made his job.
in fact, that principal, let me tell you the quote from that principal. The quote from that principal is after we took some tests and I scored off the charts,
Right.
He said, I got to tell you something, son. 99th percentile people worry me. Okay? I am geared for the 85th percentile person.
That's very quotable. That's fantastic.
Love that.
Oh, my God.
This seems like a good time to take a look at a clip from Starman. So here we're going to take a look at a clip from Robert Stone's Starman with our subject, Gentry Lee.
I cannot imagine a better place for Gentry Lee to work than the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, trying to build spacecraft to explore the planets robotically. I have maybe 18 to 20 projects under my jurisdiction, ranging from ideas for things we're going to do 10 years from now to spacecraft that have been flying for 15 years and have a problem. And I would like to continue to do that with the productive years that I have left. One of the biggest philosophical questions that human beings have ever faced is the question, are we alone in the universe? Why is it important whether or not there is life on Mars or ever was? If we discover life of any kind anywhere other than on the planet Earth, it will be the greatest scientific discovery in history.
Fantastic. So here's my question, which I want to ask you about, and you get to some of this in the film, but I'd love to hear you sitting here talk about this. There's the "Are we alone?" question, which of course is the greatest scientific potentially discovery, if we could sort of answer that. That is, and you're a scientist, and that has been, obviously an important part of this. What would it mean, sort of philosophically, or sort of, I want to say almost existentially, for a human to understand that there's other life? What would that transaction be of that new knowledge in terms of how we look at ourselves?
The entire history of mankind has basically leaned toward we are a very special, unusual, unlikely species.
Right.
Okay? In every religion, it is a relationship between us and God that supersedes any other relationship that exists. The moment that we discover that there exists, or existed even in the past, some other species, it doesn't have to be an advanced species, but I'll get to that in a moment, it says we need to reconsider who we are and what we are. It is my belief that one of the reasons, understand, I will always differentiate between knowledge and belief. It is my belief that one of the reasons that we have not been contacted by advanced species, and yes, I believe they are there, okay, is because if you were to do an assay of the human species and ask yourself the question, what is the likelihood that they will survive for any extended period of time? The answer would be no.
They meaning humans.
The people who have, the species that have surveyed the entire galaxy and know about the emergence of life. Now, this is mentioned in a way in the film, but we didn't go into as much detail as I would like to have gone because it's more philosophical than it is scientific.
Correct.
Okay. Now, I have made the statement to human beings acting badly throughout history that what an amazing change would come to us if, instead of thinking of ourselves as little lower than the angels, we said we're little better than the primates. Because in truth, if you go back to the evolutionary pattern, just 60 million years ago, there was a species that became everything from human beings to gorillas to the apes of today. Okay. Our DNA is more than 98% the same as the chimpanzee.
98.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, why do I think this is important? And why do I think that it would be so wonderful to know? I've said on TV before, someone says, what's the most wonderful thing that could happen to you during your life? I said, the number one thing would be for all human beings to swallow a tolerance pill. And accept...
Are you working on that?
And accept the fact that we are different and it's okay.
Right, yeah.
But the number two thing would be to know for certain, because I'm basically convinced that it's true, that there exists other life forms out there far more advanced than we are, that has faced the same issues that we have faced as an evolving species and survived and made life better. That is the message that I want. So what happens if we get contact of any kind with an advanced extraterrestrial species? This is something, we almost did another hour on this subject alone. First of all, you have to realize that if you take all, as we did in Cosmos, we used the metaphor of the cosmic calendar, where we took all time from the Big Bang, 13.81 billion, plus or minus 50 million years ago, till today, and we said, suppose that's 1 year.
Right.
What are all the events that take place, and where do they happen on that calendar? Okay?
Yeah.
Well, stars, planets start forming in February, March. But our solar system does not come along until September.
Right.
Okay? So that means that there could be intelligences out there that have spent 3 times as long as our entire solar system has existed, developing. So Arthur and I make this statement all the time, and it doesn't sink in. It would not matter when we're contacted by extraterrestrials. The average extraterrestrial will be so far advanced that and he says this, that their technology will be indistinguishable from magic. But for me, what I think would happen and what would be the best thing would be if we discover that there is another path to life, then that means there's also another path to intelligence. And perhaps, just perhaps, some species somewhere figured out how to get through this critical juncture, and we could learn from them. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about a scary graph that I'd like you to pass on to you. It's notional. Imagine what is the population necessary to destroy the world as a function of time?
I don't know what that number is.
Okay. It was in the millions back before Christ. Do you know what it is today? It took a huge jump with the development of the atomic bomb.
Sure.
And it's now about to take another huge drop because we now have people who have the knowledge and the capability to program a disease that wipes us all out. Now, suppose there's the Fermi paradox, which is in the thing. Where are they, Enrico Fermi said. There are all these billions and billions, and this number is staggering. When I tell it to people, they don't get it. I said, there are, in our Milky Way galaxy alone, 150 billion stars. And after the Kepler mission, we now know that most stars have planets. There may be 1 trillion planets.
Wow.
So, yes, we're special, but the numbers are overwhelming. And the probability that somewhere else intelligence has emerged, to me, is almost 1. So, as Enrico Fermi says, where are they? Perhaps there is something about the advance of intelligence that is unstable and destabilizing. Look around. Look at our world today. Ask yourself this question. Are we on a trajectory as a species to last 10,000 years? 100,000 years? The dinosaurs lasted 100 million years. But I want to come back to this cosmic calendar, okay? In this cosmic calendar, first of all, the solar system emerges in September and October. Jump forward. The dinosaurs are in control of the Earth over the Christmas holidays. What?
Yeah.
What? Now, are you ready for this? All human history, and I date human history from the Sumerians who first started writing it. It's the last 12 seconds. Yeah. All right? So, what's the point? The point is that we are small compared to all these things. And it is likely that we are small compared to other intelligences, which, as Arthur Clarke says in the film, are probably much more advanced than we are. Now, I'm going to jump, and you might not think it's a normal sequence. I'm going to jump to my favorite science fiction book of the last 10 years. From Cixin-Liu, The Three-Body Problem.
I haven't read it. Okay, go.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
Okay, I'm going to go get it.
I'm going to tell you something. Have you ever read Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel?
No.
I'm familiar with the book. I have not read it. But
now, what you have to do to read that book is skip through the 50 pages of botany. Okay? Now, Jared would probably say, Gentry, you're terrible.
Come on.
I mean, it's too much. But in Cixin-Liu, the Chinese person who wrote The Three-Body Problem, he has a fantastic mind, and he goes off on all kinds of subjects. But you have to follow him, because what he does is brilliant. He conceives of a situation in which a signal comes from a clearly advanced species, and it is received by a Chinese person who's a physicist whose father was killed in the Cultural Revolution when,
Yeah.
And she, looking around at the world, makes a solitary decision to communicate with this, wherever it's coming from, okay, in hopes that perhaps they know the secret to endurance and overcoming our shortcomings. It is intellectually brilliant because what the author does is, in order for these extraterrestrials to make contact with humans, they don't want to do it to just any humans. And so they create a video game, which they send by waves. And you have, if you're smart enough to get to the highest level in the video game, then you're smart enough to listen to what they have to say.
Oh, wow.
It is fantastic. Now, there's been several film adaptations. I'm going to take, there's one in China. The whole book is in Chinese, okay? Mm-hmm. The Chinese did a 30-part thing, which it follows the book carefully. Then there was an American-British adaptation, which has its points. It has some good things in it, but the story gets skewed, okay? The story is about humanity's place in the universe and how we should regard ourselves and our possibilities for survival. That's why it is so important, this notional graph that I was telling you about, of how many people would it take to destroy humankind, going from, in just a short period of time, millions to now, pick a number, 100? 100 diabolical people working with AI could conceivably generate a disease that would wipe us all out before we figured out how to overcome it.
Yeah.
So with that piece of very complex and potentially dark information, what's the how do you live in relationship to that, I guess? How do you get up in the morning?
People say, well, are you pessimistic? I said, no, I'm not pessimistic.
No.
I have 8 children. Would a pessimist have 8 children? I believe there is something in us. If we nourish it properly, that will allow us to rise above those characteristics of it. Now, I'm going to go to Carl's book about how we are structured in the brain. The central brain is a reptilian brain. That's where fear and flight come from. Yep. The reptilian brain is overlaid by a primate brain, okay? And that brain is overlaid by the thing that is singularly human. If we can learn how to take the impulses that come from that reptilian brain, damp them out, and let them be overruled by the things that are at the top of this, then we have a chance to survive. And that's what I tell people over and over and over again. Don't listen to your reptilian brain.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting.
Now, unfortunately, we have the following problem. The reptilian brain is easy to overwhelm us, and so it's hard for us to realize that that's happening, okay? So what we need to do is to be schooled in how to allow those particular characteristics that are the most outstanding about us to flourish. Right. And that's why I believe I was criticized for the novels that I wrote because everybody's so smart and some of these people do the right thing. And my answer was, You want me to spend 5 years of my life writing about dunderheads?
Yeah.
And that brings me to Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah.
Arthur was an absolutely wonderful teacher for me.
Incredible that he would identify you as you weren't a writer, you at that point weren't a science fiction writer, arguably one of the greatest science fiction writers ever, and he said, I see in you the emergence of a writer, and he took you under his wing.
I may cry because it was such a remarkable event. I went over there, as we showed, with Peter Guber. Peter Guber, the famous
producer,
and he's still my friend instantly. Peter and I just had lunch not too long ago. And Peter wanted to get Arthur interested in a movie, and Arthur would not get interested unless Peter brought somebody who Arthur might think was interesting. And I had met Arthur before when he came to visit JPL, and I toured him around. So I went over there, and Peter had some health and business issues, and so one night, Arthur and I were sitting there together having dinner, and he was talking to me about how much he had been enjoying talking to me because of my knowledge of space and all that sort of stuff. And he said to me, I'll never forget this, we're sitting at the table, he says, have you ever thought about writing? And I said, yes, sir. I've been writing ideas for things I might want to write if I ever stop doing engineering stuff. He said, oh, that's very interesting. He said, tell me an idea. Imagine Arthur C. Clarke is saying, tell me an idea. So I started. He said, no. He says, tell me a science fiction idea. I'm sitting there in this restaurant and I'm saying, the grand master of science fiction has just asked me if I have any ideas about writing science fiction. And inside me, my light was going on. Oh my God, opportunity. Oh my God, opportunity. Go ahead. All that can happen is he can laugh at you. So I told him an idea that I had for a science fiction novel. And he said, that's very interesting. I had a similar idea, but I had the following 3 problems. I had already resolved 2 of them.
Oh my goodness.
And I told him, and his eyes went, that's fascinating. He said, now, I can't promise you anything, but I'm going to invite you to come back and we will explore the possibility of perhaps doing something together. So I said to myself, okay, so I'm with Peter Guber. Okay, we have a flight planned back. So we go back and I go see my new wife, and who has just given birth to our first child. And I'm in terrible financial situation from an earlier divorce and so forth and so on. And so I say to her, I'm going to take 2/3 of all the money we have left, and I'm going to fly back to Sri Lanka, and I am going to talk to this man, Arthur C. Clarke, about possibly writing a novel together. She looked at me. She said, are you mad? I said, no. I have this feeling inside me that if I do not do this, I will regret it for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. Now, I will tell you, it's possible that nothing will come from it. We filmed all this, but it's not in the movie, so therefore I'm going to continue.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
So I flew back, and we went up into the hills of Sri Lanka, and during the day, we would sketch out ideas for the first novel, and then he would ask me to summarize the discussion, to write down the summary of the discussion because he was too tired and he wanted to go to bed. So I did that. Every evening after dinner, I would sit there and I would write down what we had talked about. And on the fourth day, he said, I have informed my agent that you and I are going to write a novel together, and it is out for auction as we speak.
Oh.
I said, Arthur, that's unbelievable for me. And I started crying. I mean, this man had just done something. I mean, they were incredible. So I flew home and I found out 2 days later that we had a contract to write a novel. That was Cradle. That was the first one. And I was going to get $225,000. And Arthur said to me when he said that he had told his agent to go ahead, he said, we're going to write this book and it's going to be by Arthur C. Clarke and Gentry Lee. Okay, you're going to do all the writing. He says, I'm going to review it and give you comments. Now, you're probably wondering why it's going to be by Arthur C. Clarke and Gentry Lee. And he smiled with that little wonderful pixie-ish smile that he had. He says, it's because half of a large number is more than all of a small number.
Good answer.
And you were enough of a mathematician to understand.
Yeah, that is correct.
And then halfway through, we were having great fun writing Cradle. That was the first one. And halfway through, he asked me if I had any ideas for any other novels. And I said, yes, sir. I've been entranced by Rendezvous with Rama since the first time I read it. And I believe that it is the beginning. Remember, you say at the end, the Ramans did everything in threes, and you leave so many questions unanswered that I think a sequel to Rendezvous with Rama could be done. He said, okay, we'll take a shot. So we spent a week working together off-site, okay? And we wrote a 15-page description of what became 3 novels. We knew that it would be 3 novels, and we sent it off to his agent, okay? I got home. Now, here I am. I'm standing in my house with my wife, who just had a baby, my new wife, who just had a baby a month and a half ago, and here I am doing this strange thing with this guy in Sri Lanka. And my agent then said, I'm going to keep you online while the auction goes for the 3 books that you and Arthur are going to write together.
Oh, my God.
Okay. At noon, it was $2.5 million. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was $3.5 million. My wife was going, are those dollars? I said, yes, they're dollars. Then it ended up being $4 million. Wow. This is in 1987. Wow. That's huge.
Yeah.
So I stepped down from my job at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I became a novelist. Yeah. And for the next 5 years, I got to spend my time writing those 3 novels, the Rama novels, with Arthur over my shoulder, ever so gently, I don't think this one is quite right. And I would go to Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka was having a civil war, and it was, all sorts of stuff. It was an absolutely amazing experience. He would, when I would show up, he would have all these ideas. I mean, he was a fountainhead of ideas. Now, the physicist in me will tell you, 8 out of 10, no. 1, that's interesting. And 1, oh my God, what an incredible, brilliant human being he was. Yeah. He was graceful, gracious, And okay, a lot of people have criticized him and said he had an incredible ego. He was genius. Of course he had an incredible ego.
He earned it. Yes, right.
You know, this is for, so that was, and then of course, as you saw from the film, we have a number of quotes from him.
Yes, they're spectacular.
And-
I mean, between him and also Carl Sagan,
Yes.
and then your journey through it. I mean, the film is just.
I spent 5 years of my life partnered with Carl Sagan and 5 years of my life partnered with Arthur C. Clarke. Can you imagine a more fortunate life?
My only question is, like, what took people so long to make this movie about you? I mean, really, it's spectacular.
It's terrific. It's a fabulous film, and it's just whether people can have the opportunity to hear you talking after the film or just to be able to spend time with you in the film itself is great. And we're so happy the film exists.
I urge people to watch it more than once.
Yeah.
Because what I've now been out and I've listened to people watching it. What happens is the viewer hits some resonance, something that really turns he or she on, and then they don't necessarily follow some of the tendrils of that.
Yeah.
And the end part is so important.
It is.
That we live in paradise. What exists on this earth is so incredibly special. And the more you know about what's out there, the more you say to yourself, oh my gosh, why is our species not doing everything it possibly can to keep this paradise?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I'm not going to ask you to answer that one now, but I do have one question that I want to get to. I'm of course a native Angelino, but I do currently live in Seattle, and I think a lot of my Seattle neighbors want to know what is going to happen first. Is there going to be a manned mission to Mars, or will the Mariners finally get to the World Series? No. All right.
Okay. People have told me that I am losing my credibility as a futurist when I say human beings will not go to Mars in the lifetime of anyone who's living today. And they said, oh, for goodness sakes, you don't. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm an engineer and a biologist.
Right.
And I know what it takes.
Yeah.
Okay? And on top of that, what is the purpose of sending a human being?
Well, what's the purpose of the Mariners winning the World Series? I know a lot of people would be very happy about it.
If the goal of the human species can ever be to accumulate as much knowledge as possible for the benefit of not just humans, but this entire planet. Notice that.
Yeah.
In other words, it is not okay to say I'm concerned about the human species alone. Because if we don't take care of this planet, there won't be a place to live. Now, Elon says, well, we'll go and colonize Mars. And in the movie, as you saw, I say, wait a minute. We should not be thinking about colonizing other places until we learn to properly take care of the place that's ours.
It's going to go make
Thank
another
you.
mess,
Thank
right?
you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
at any rate, I think it's highly likely that the Mariners will be in the World Series.
All right. I love it.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah, exactly. Starman is going to be opening on February 4th in New York. It opens February 13th in Los Angeles. You're going to be here in LA for some of the screenings on the 13th and 14th. I guess you're going to be in New York as well.
Oh yes, I'm doing the whole thing. But I told the people that are making the arrangements, I said, just a minute. Remember, I am almost 84 years old. Can you give me a day off every now and then?
Afraid not. Not on the cards. You're just going to have to. You can get information about the film at starmanmovie.com. And hopefully they will have, once they have this whole tour set up and where it's opening and everything, but it's going to be playing in theaters. Beautiful film, not just to spend time with you, but also the visuals in the film are astounding. Great clips, great archival material. So I encourage everybody to see it however they can, but certainly if you can't see it at your local art house, that would be worth doing. Again, Starman.
And I'd like to add just one thing.
Sure,
to that.
please.
It is not just for the technologically savant.
No.
We have gone out of our way to make a film about human beings and their attempts to stretch.
Yeah, curiosity.
And that metaphor can play in any spot. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I don't know anything about space travel, it doesn't matter. If you have a mind and curiosity, please come see the film.
Yeah,
so
and
well
for
said.
people of all ages as well. I really want to encourage.
So well said.
Yeah.
And if this interview isn't enough to remind you why you need to go to the theater, come also to see you speak, because it's such a delight to be here and hear you talk. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming today. Really, such a
glad.
privilege
Thank you,
to be
Gentry.
here with you.
It's a real honor.
Yeah.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe and share. We want as many people as possible to find out about this movie, Starman, and all the other movies that we talk about here on Inside the Art House.
Yeah. Thank you. See you next time.
This episode of Inside the Art House was produced by Wishing Well Entertainment and Raphael Sparge, with on-site production by Noreen Dickerson. Our supervising producers are Thomas Cassetta and Miles McCreary. The episode was edited by Rick Pratt, with sound mixing by Thomas Cassetta. Our musical theme was composed by Isabel Engman and Gerardo Garcia Jr., graphics by Jenna DeAngelis, and social media marketing and web design by Stephanie Peters. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. See you next time on Inside the Art House.